The sound of tearing paper sliced through the cabin like a slap. A first-class boarding pass, ripped in half, held in the air like evidence, fluttered to the floor. "You don't look like a first-class family," the flight attendant said, loud enough for 3 rows to hear. Aria Monroe blinked, clutching her sketchbook tighter against her chest. She was 6 years old, barely tall enough to see over the seat in front of her. Her hair was in 2 neat puffs, and her sparkly sneakers squeaked a little every time she shifted her weight. "Mommy," she whispered, "did I do something wrong?" Justice Monroe didn't flinch. She looked the attendant, Lauren Visser by her name tag, straight in the eye. Then she calmly reached into her coat pocket, pulled out a slim, leather-bound notebook, and wrote 3 precise words. "Protocol Trigger, 1147. Tell us where you're watching from, and what you'd do if someone tore up your child's dignity on a plane." Aria hadn't done anything wrong. She'd been quiet, smiling, grinning when they passed through the gate and she was handed her own boarding pass for Seat 2A. It was her first time flying internationally, her first time flying first class, and her first time leaving the country since she'd been cleared of cancer. This trip was her reward for enduring months of chemo, for missing birthdays, for growing up too fast. Zurich was supposed to be joy, snowy mountains, chocolate, the first stamp in her tiny passport. Instead, her ticket lay shredded on the floor. Justice slowly looked down at the 2 halves of Aria's pass, then at Lauren's hand, which still held the other. Lauren's tone turned clinical, almost smug. "Ma'am, this is a security issue. You're in the wrong cabin." "You haven't scanned anything," Justice replied evenly. "The tickets were issued through your airline's mobile system. The QR codes are active. Confirmed. Paid." Lauren crossed her arms. "Anyone can fake an app screenshot. That seat belongs to someone else." Behind her, a white man in 2C adjusted his blazer and folded a newspaper like this happened every day. He didn't look surprised. Across the aisle, a woman in business attire raised an eyebrow. "Wait," she said quietly. "I saw them sit down. They weren't causing any trouble." Justice nodded politely at her, but kept her focus on the flight attendant. "If you believe this is a security concern," Justice said, "you should scan the manifest, not rely on assumptions." Lauren didn't move. Instead, she turned to the intercom and pressed the button. "Security to first class. Manifest conflict." A few rows back, a man in his 30s tapped his phone camera on. "They're seriously calling security on a kid?" he muttered. The woman beside him whispered, "Because she's black." A tall man in a navy jacket emerged from the front galley, his badge identifying him as Daniel Pierce, airline security. He walked slowly, assessing the scene. "What seems to be the problem?" Lauren gestured toward Justice and Aria. "They tried to board with forged documents. I've torn the pass already." Justice didn't raise her voice. "You've destroyed evidence without verification." Daniel looked unsure. Lauren stepped closer, lowering her voice like she was sharing a dangerous secret. "They've been flagged. The child was disruptive at boarding. I recommend relocation to standby." "Disruptive?" Justice asked. "She was humming," Lauren said flatly. Aria's eyes widened. "That was my song." Justice bent down beside her daughter, brushing a curl from her cheek. "Sweetheart," she said softly, "you didn't do anything wrong. Sometimes people try to rewrite the truth when they feel small." From behind, another passenger's voice cut in. Jamal Carter, a frequent flyer in 3B. "I've got the whole thing on video. Nobody caused anything. Y'all are just mad a little black girl got a first-class seat." Daniel's lips tightened. Justice slowly straightened. "I'm asking one more time," she said to Lauren. "Scan the code." Lauren didn't answer. She reached down, picked up the other half of Aria's boarding pass, and, without warning, ripped it again, tearing it into quarters. Gasps. Even the hum of the plane's engine felt louder. Aria's voice shook. "Mommy, are we still going to Switzerland?" Justice held her gaze. "Yes, baby," she said softly. "But we won't be flying with everyone else." She turned to the overhead camera. adjusting her position until the lens caught her smartwatch. Then, with a steady press of her thumb, she activated the biometric protocol linked to her identity. A small pulse blinked blue. She didn't say anything out loud. But hundreds of miles away, deep within the secure servers of the Ethos Bridge global network, an alert lit up. Ethos Bridge override received auth code J. Monroe, final key. Trigger time 11:47 EST flag. Reason: manifest tampering, racial profiling, minor involved. Auto cascade initiated affected routes, 1 in 12 international flights. License status pending. 3 regional carriers response. Window 9 minutes. Back in the cabin, Lauren crossed her arms. "Do we have a problem, ma'am?" Justice looked at her with quiet fire. Not yet. A few rows behind, a passenger leaned into his seatmate. "Something's about to happen," he said. "She's not just a mom." And he was right. Because 9 minutes later, airspace over 3 countries would close. 3 CEOs would get urgent calls from regulators. And this flight, this crew, this smug little display of cruelty, it would become the case study that rewrote an entire industry's code of ethics. But for now, there was only a mother, a daughter, and a past torn into quarters on the floor. For a long, humming moment, no one said a word. The air inside the first-class cabin felt heavy, like all the oxygen had been sucked out when the torn ticket hit the floor. Some passengers tried not to make eye contact. Others just stared straight ahead, pretending to read menus or check phones. But a few were watching very closely now, especially the ones filming. From row 3, Jamal Carter tilted his phone just enough to frame everything. The mother standing silently, the daughter holding back tears, and the uniformed woman who just shredded a first-class ticket into quarters like it was junk mail. "You're seriously doubling down on this?" he said out loud. "That kid's 6. "Sir, no filming," Lauren snapped, glancing at him with a smirk that looked far too comfortable on her face. "You already called security," he replied. "Might as well document the rest of the circus." Aria clutched the sleeve of her mother's coat, trying not to cry. She had a small band-aid on her arm, still faded from her last blood test. Her glittery sketchbook had slipped halfway out of her backpack during the chaos, now dangling awkwardly by a zipper pull. Justice didn't move to fix it. She didn't move at all. She simply stood there, body angled slightly so her smartwatch faced the ceiling camera, the blue pulse still blinking every few seconds like a heartbeat. "I'm asking you once more," Justice said, her voice clear but low. "Run the ticket data, not assumptions. The system will verify what your attitude cannot." But Lauren wasn't interested in verification. She was interested in control. "She refused to move," Lauren said to Daniel Pierce, the security officer. "And now she's refusing a direct order from the crew." "She's standing still," Daniel replied, uncertainty creeping into his voice. "We also have a passenger complaint," Lauren added quickly, gesturing behind her. "Row 2C says something's missing from his personal items." Justice turned. "Excuse me?" From the aisle seat in 2C, the white man in the gray blazer, Marcus Clay, according to the flight manifest, spoke without looking up. "My wallet was in the seat back pocket. Now it's gone." Jamal let out an audible scoff. "You've got to be kidding me." Lauren turned sharply. "Sir, please don't interfere with an active security investigation." Aria blinked slowly. Her voice was barely a whisper. "Mommy, I didn't touch anything, I swear." Justice didn't flinch. "I know, baby." Then, louder to the crew. "If you're accusing my daughter of theft, say it clearly. Don't dance around it with vague complaints and fake concern." "No one's accusing the child," Lauren said in her best professional voice. "But we do need to check your belongings for safety reasons." "You tore up our boarding passes," Justice said. "Now you're planting a theft story?" Daniel hesitated. "Ma'am, if there's a missing item, we have to—" "Check the cameras," Justice interrupted. "Check the time logs. Ask the passenger when he last saw the wallet." Across the aisle, a woman in a navy pantsuit raised her hand. Sorry, she said, standing halfway. I boarded with them. That man, she pointed at Marcus, was reading a newspaper the whole time. No mention of a wallet, and the girl's bag hasn't even moved. Ma'am, Lauren said coldly, please stay in your seat. No, the woman snapped. Because I've seen this movie before, and I'm tired of the same bad script. 2 rows back, another hand went up. It was Sophie Nguyen, a junior flight attendant. Nervous, pale. She'd only been with the airline for 11 months. I just came from the galley, she said quietly. Marcus has his wallet. I saw him tuck it into his coat when we started boarding. Lauren froze. What? I saw it, Sophie repeated, louder this time. He has it. Jamal grinned. Well, there goes that lie. For the first time, Lauren looked truly off balance. Her mouth opened slightly, then closed again. Her eyes darted from Justice to Daniel to Marcus, whose face had turned the color of wet chalk. Ethan, the second attendant on duty, stepped forward like he'd just realized he should participate. Maybe she's mistaken, he said quickly. People misremember things. I didn't misremember anything, Sophie said, her voice shaking but steady. I'm not blind. Justice exhaled slowly and bent down to zip up Arya's bag. When she stood, her expression was unreadable. You've called us liars, fraudsters, now thieves, all without a shred of proof. She looked directly at Lauren. I want the manifest scanned. I want this flight time-stamped. I want every action logged under review, because when this is over, it won't be me answering questions. Lauren tried to recover. You're escalating this. Justice raised one eyebrow. No, you are. I'm documenting it. The intercom crackled again. Cabin crew, status update. Is the manifest cleared? Lauren hesitated. We're resolving a behavioral conflict with a flagged party. Justice's voice sliced through the cabin. Flagged for what exactly? Daniel took a cautious step forward, lowering his voice. Captain marked your manifest as a potential security disruption. He cited non-compliance. Non-compliance? Justice repeated. For asking you to scan a boarding pass? He didn't answer. Justice looked down at her watch. The blinking blue light had turned solid. She didn't smile. She didn't need to. 9 minutes had passed. Far above the Atlantic, flight routing systems began rejecting requests from 3 major carriers. An alert pinged across the Ethos Bridge control grid. Ethics clearance revoked. Tier 1 suspension initiated. 112 flights across 4 continents were frozen mid-sequence. Airports flagged carrier access. Regulators were notified. And the FAA, along with 2 European transport authorities, opened emergency ethics audits. But inside the cabin, none of that showed. Yet, what did show was the slow shifting of energy. Passengers sitting up straighter, phones filming more openly, quiet whispers becoming pointed questions. Someone muttered, "They're messing with the wrong one." Another said, "She's too calm. She knows something." Justice didn't say a word. She sat down in seat 2A, pulled Arya gently into her lap, and wrapped one arm around her. Then she looked straight ahead. Daniel didn't move. Ethan stepped back. Lauren opened her mouth, then closed it again. Even Marcus sat stiffly now, as if realizing the walls were closing in. Sophie moved closer, voice shaking. "I'm sorry for not saying something earlier," she told Justice. "I didn't know what was happening at first." Justice nodded. "Thank you. Your courage matters more than their titles." Arya whispered, "Mommy, are we in trouble?" Justice leaned down. "No, baby," she said. "We're just helping the truth find its way." The air had changed. You could feel it in the way people shifted in their seats, in the silence that stretched too long, in the way no one dared to say what was becoming obvious. Something was wrong with this flight. But not with the passengers in 2A and 2B, with the system. Justice Monroe sat quietly beside her daughter, her arm wrapped around Arya like a shield and a promise. The girl's head rested against her shoulder, and the sketchbook lay forgotten in her lap. The ticket was gone. The lie about the wallet had been exposed. The child had been called disruptive for humming. And yet, no one had apologized. No one had backed down. Because people like Lauren didn't back down until they were forced to. Across the aisle, Jamal hadn't stopped recording. Neither had the woman in 1D or the man behind her in 3A. What started as whispers had now become camera phones, email drafts, hashtags forming in real time. And then came the moment. The moment it all shifted. A subtle chime echoed from the flight attendant panel behind the galley. 3 short tones. Lauren looked back, frowning. It wasn't a standard signal. Ethan leaned closer, checked the screen, then blinked. "What is that?" Lauren asked. Ethan tapped. The message on the screen was simple. Ethics compliance query. Level red. Stand by for authority override. Lauren stared at it. This isn't a normal alert." Ethan's voice dropped. "It's coming from external." Justice said nothing, but the pulse of blue light on her smartwatch had stopped blinking. Now it glowed solid. She reached up, tapped the screen once, and the watch went dark. She didn't need it anymore. The message had already been sent, and the world had already received it. 3,000 miles away, at a secure terminal in Brussels, a man in a dark gray blazer stood from his workstation. "Confirmed," he said. Tier 1 activation code traced to J. Monroe. "Justice Monroe?" someone asked from across the room. "Yep, one of the founding signatories." The room went still. "Shut it down," came the order. "Initiate cascade review. Freeze European routing for the carriers involved. Notify FAA and Geneva Ethics Council. Now." Back on the plane, none of that was visible. But the effects had already begun. A ping reached the captain's panel, then another, then a message in all red. "Route locked. Pending ethics clearance." Captain Schultz stared at it from inside the cockpit. He glanced at the co-pilot, then back to the screen. His brow furrowed. "What the hell's going on?" Meanwhile, in the cabin, Daniel Pierce, the security officer, stood frozen in the aisle. He'd stopped moving the second Sophie spoke up, the second the wallet story fell apart, the second the cameras turned toward them instead of away. He looked down at Arya, then at Justice. This wasn't what he'd signed up for. Lauren wasn't backing down. Her pride had already been bruised, and now she was scrambling. She reached for her intercom again, muttering into it. "The child's seatbelt was tampered with," she said. "Could be a safety issue." Justice's head turned. "I'm sorry, what did you just say?" Lauren raised her voice. "This child may have been interfering with safety equipment. I recommend removal from the aircraft under Regulation 22.4. Jamal stood up. "Are you insane?" Arya's face went pale. "I didn't touch anything," she cried. Justice stood slowly, the calm in her body now shifting to something harder. "You're making this worse by the second," she said. "You're not just profiling us. You're building a paper trail of lies." "I'm following protocol," Lauren snapped. "No," Justice replied, her voice steel. "You're inventing protocol as you go and hoping no one notices." Then Sophie stepped forward again. "I saw you," she said to Lauren, her voice trembling. "I saw you lean into the child's seat. You touched the belt. You loosened it while pretending to fix the tray." Lauren's face turned white. "You're lying." "No, I'm not," Sophie said, "and I'll testify under oath." Daniel looked at Lauren, his confidence gone. "You did what?" Justice turned to face him. "Go ahead. Detain us. Lay one hand on my child. But understand, every move you make now is under federal review." Jamal turned to the rest of the cabin. "This is criminal now. This ain't about boarding. This is about destroying a child because she doesn't look the part." The older woman in 1D stood up. "I'm a mother," she said, her voice shaking. "And if this happened to my child, I would burn the whole system down." A passenger in row 4 added, "You're not going to get away with this." Then another, and another. "We're watching. This is going online. You picked the wrong one today." Justice raised her voice. Not loud, but clear. "You made one assumption when we boarded this plane, that we were nobody. That we had no power, that we wouldn't fight back. She looked directly at Lauren. But here's the truth. When the system fails, I don't scream. I sign, I authorize, I activate, and then I watch it collapse from the inside out. The intercom crackled again. Captain Schultz's voice sounded more strained this time. Cabin crew, we've received a routing lock. Stand by for override instructions. We may be returning to gate. Lauren turned in panic. Returning? For what? Ethan leaned closer. We're being blocked. All flight clearance is suspended until ethics audit clears. Lauren's face fell. She looked at Justice like she was seeing her for the first time. Not as a problem, not as a nuisance, but as a threat. Not loud, not violent, not yelling, just right. Dangerous because she was right. Daniel turned slowly to Lauren and Ethan. I'm done, he said. I'm not risking my career on a lie. He stepped away from the aisle. Passengers began clapping. Not a standing ovation, just slow, scattered applause, but real. Justice sat down again, pulled Aria close, and whispered, It's almost over, sweetheart. Are we going to Switzerland now? Maybe not on this plane, she said. But we're going. Ethan took a step back, looked around the cabin, and muttered. She triggered it. She had access. That's why the system froze us. Lauren stared. She who? Ethan swallowed hard. Justice Monroe, he whispered. She's not just a mother. She's the co-creator of Ethos Bridge. Lauren turned pale, and the camera in 3A caught every second of it. The moment the plane stopped taxiing, you could feel it in your chest. A hush fell over the cabin like fog rolling in, silent, heavy, foreboding. Passengers glanced at each other. Some instinctively reached for their phones again. Others just froze, mid-sentence, unsure whether to unbuckle or pray. The intercom crackled. Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. We've been instructed to return to Gate 3. Please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened. Do not use electronic devices at this time. Lauren's jaw tightened. She spun toward Ethan, who was staring at the security screen again. Why are we going back? She hissed. I don't know, he whispered. But something's overriding our flight plan. Even the manual inputs are locked. She turned toward the cockpit, but the door was shut tight. She had no control anymore, and for people like her, that was the real emergency. Back in 2A, Justice didn't move. She sat like a stone, arms gently around Aria, her face unreadable. Across the aisle, Sophie, still clutching her tote, leaned over quietly. What's happening? Justice replied without looking up. The system is responding. They're not coming for me. They're coming for the behavior. What system? Ethos Core, Justice said. The oversight layer behind the Ethos Bridge signal. Sophie blinked. She hadn't heard that name since a Senate hearing 2 years ago. A low thud echoed from beneath the cabin. Landing gear stabilized. The plane had docked. For a few seconds, there was no announcement. No lights, no movement. Then, the front door opened, and everything changed. 2 people boarded first, neither in TSA uniform, neither in airport gear. They wore black slacks, soft gray blazers, and discreet silver lanyards with no airline logo. Only one symbol glinted on the badge. Ethos Core Compliance Team. Behind them followed a third person, FAA liaison, tall, white-haired, face like stone. They said nothing at first, just stepped inside the cabin, looked around, and scanned for her. Justice didn't raise a hand. She didn't need to. The lead agent turned without hesitation and walked straight to 2A. He knelt beside Aria, who sat up, clinging to her sketchbook. Hi, he said gently. My name's Kyle. I'm here because someone used their voice when others chose silence. Aria blinked at him. We're not in trouble? No, sweetheart, Kyle said. You're the reason this plane didn't take off with the lie intact. Then he looked at Justice. His tone shifted. Ma'am, thank you for activating the protocol. Justice offered only a slight nod. Sophie was stunned. Lauren, several rows up, shot to her feet. Wait just a minute. Who are you people? This is my aircraft cabin. Kyle stood slowly, turned to her. Ma'am, As of 6 minutes ago, your airline's flight ethics rating has been marked non-compliant across all international routes. You are now under full observation and review per FAA Code 8.3. Lawrence sputtered. You can't. This isn't even illegal. It's binding under the Passenger Ethics Accord, signed last November. Ethan dropped his tablet. Passengers whispered. Someone audibly said, "Oh, she messed up big." The FAA liaison stepped forward now. He looked like someone who hadn't smiled in years. Who's the lead cabin officer on this flight? Lauren raised her hand slowly. He took a folded printout from his inner coat and read aloud. Report. Passenger in 2A and minor in 2B accused of fraud. Attempted seat theft. Non-compliance with safety procedure. Recommendation, removal from aircraft. He looked up. Reviewed by independent footage. Contradicted by 3 separate witnesses, one being internal. Then, verdict, false claim, bias-based escalation, crew manipulation of evidence. He looked directly at Lauren. You are hereby suspended from service pending full investigation. Gasps rippled across the cabin. Lauren looked like she'd been slapped. She turned to Ethan, but he was already backing away. I didn't touch the belt, she muttered. She did. The liaison cut her off. Ms. Monroe hasn't touched anything. The plane touched her. The second agent stepped forward, holding a tablet. All recorded data has been transferred to Ethos Core. Additionally, passenger complaints from 6 previous flights have been reopened due to pattern matches. Daniel, the flight security officer, muttered under his breath. She's done. Then came the twist Justice hadn't planned, but welcomed. The FAA liaison turned back to her. Ms. Monroe, a private word, if I may. Justice stood slowly. Aria gripped her hand, then let go. They stepped just outside the cabin door. He didn't waste time. You helped build this system. I didn't want to use it, but it's here for a reason. Are you aware your activation triggered a Tier 2 suspension across 112 flights worldwide? Yes, she said simply, and I stand by it. Back inside the cabin, Lauren was now escorted off. She didn't scream. She didn't resist. She just walked, with her shoulders finally low and her power visibly gone. Passengers clapped again. Not loud, not forced. Just enough to say, we saw, we remember. Back in row 2, Aria whispered to Sophie, Can we draw now? Yeah, Sophie said. I think the flight's going to be different from now on. Minutes later, the intercom came back on. Captain Schultz cleared his throat. Ladies and gentlemen, this flight will continue after a short crew change. Thank you for your patience. And to the young artist in row 2, thank you for your quiet courage. Justice returned to her seat. Aria held her hand. Sophie smiled softly. The cabin felt lighter, not because Justice was loud, but because this time, Justice didn't have to shout. She just had to exist. The terminal windows buzzed faintly as Flight 417 taxied back into position. A new crew had boarded. Lauren was gone. Ethan was quiet. Sophie had moved to sit beside Aria, who now sketched birds with long wings and shields on their backs. Justice sat by the window, but she wasn't watching the tarmac. She was waiting. Her phone, still on airplane mode, lit up silently. A blue icon pulsed on the home screen. Not a call, not a message. A request. She tapped it once, then again. Tier 3 activation requested. Confirm. This will escalate to full industry ethics cascade, FAA/DOT. Ethics Oversight Council will be notified. She paused, then typed, Confirmed. Monroe Variant 3A. A quiet rumble moved through the infrastructure of the airline industry. Not the plane, not the airport, but the invisible layers above it, the ones people like Lauren had never seen and never believed could touch them. Until now. In a glass-walled boardroom 30 stories above DC, a meeting came to a sudden stop. Liam Bergson, CEO of Skyreach Holdings, stood mid-sentence when his assistant rushed in. Sir, we have an ethics cascade alert. It's coming from Ethos Core. He froze. Tier 3. Confirmed. And it's Monroe. 3 people in the room visibly paled. God help us. Back on the plane, Justice took a slow breath. Aria glanced up. Is it over, Mommy? Justice looked at her daughter's wide, wondering eyes. She thought about lying, about saying yes, but instead, not yet, baby. It's just starting. Meanwhile, across the skies, 3 international airlines, Airwex, Skynova, and Arkway, simultaneously received a compliance hold. All flights flagged as ethics pending were grounded. Across 142 airports, priority lanes for airlines under the Passenger Ethics Accord were revoked. Codes flickered. Gates reassigned. Every system connected to Ethos Core adapted, silently, precisely, without announcement. Passengers didn't notice, but boardrooms across the country, they felt it. Inside one of those boardrooms sat Richard Monroe, Justice's brother, a former Air Force strategist turned data rights executive. He now served as vice chair of the National Aviation Compliance Commission. He hadn't spoken to his sister in 2 years, not since the Accord passed. But when his device pinged and showed Ethics Cascade activated, Justice Monroe, Variant 3A, he closed his laptop without a word and stood. His deputy looked confused. Where are you going, sir? To the Senate floor. Sir, the hearing isn't for another 2 days. It is now. Back in the skies, the crew began meal service again. This time, no one looked twice when Aria got a hot meal first. No one questioned why the FAA agent remained on board in 1A. No one commented when 2 first-class passengers voluntarily gave up their seats to move next to Justice and Aria. I just want to sit near the people who changed everything, the older woman said, resting her hand gently on Aria's. Meanwhile, across TikTok, Instagram, and YouTube, videos under the hashtag #EthicsFlight417 began climbing. A clip of Lauren tearing the boarding pass, another of Justice silently opening her notebook and drawing a symbol. A close-up of the FAA officer saying, "She didn't touch the plane touched her." And the final clip, Aria whispering, "Are we safe now, Mommy?" Over 5 million views in 4 hours. The comments poured in. That little girl is braver than half our politicians. I want her on every plane I fly. Justice Monroe. That name better be in every boardroom by Monday. This is how you change a system. Quietly, precisely, with receipts. At FAA headquarters, a statement was drafted. The FAA, in coordination with Ethos Core and DOT, is reviewing all cabin incidents from the past 18 months under the Monroe Protocol. Any airline found in violation of passenger ethics, regardless of seniority, class, or origin, will face immediate compliance review, public rating downgrade, and if necessary, suspension. And in a small conference room in Georgia, a group of flight attendants watched the news feed. Silent. One of them, an older black woman with gray streaks in her bun, finally spoke. She finally used it. Another nodded. She said she never would. She didn't, until they came for her kid. Back on Flight 417, Aria had dozed off. Justice opened her sketchbook slowly, revealing the page she'd drawn earlier. It wasn't a plane. It was a ripple, starting from a single seat in row 2 and spreading outward like shock waves through the clouds. Sophie leaned over. What are you gonna do now? Justice didn't answer immediately. Then softly, finish what I started. Inside the Skynova executive floor, the mood was sour. Not angry, not shocked, scared. 3 phones rang at once. The ethics dashboard was frozen. Legal was on the line. Investor relations couldn't keep up. The company had been placed under a Level 2 ethics freeze, meaning no federal airport partnership activity for 72 hours, no loyalty program API access, and worse. Their entire International Code Share Alliance had been temporarily revoked. Jason Roth, the COO, stormed into the conference room. Who the hell signed off on Lauren booking that route? Didn't we have an alert on Justice Monroe's name since the Accord? A younger VP spoke up, nervous. We removed it. Legal said it was discriminatory to flag her by name. Discriminatory, Roth hissed. She built the system. Well, they said if we singled her out, it could expose us to lawsuit. Now look at us, he cut in. We're not being sued. We're being shut down. Meanwhile, across town at Arkway Airlines, CEO Miranda Lien stood in front of a map glowing red. Each light represented a route that had just been downgraded to ethics non-compliant by the Ethos Bridge system. Seoul gone, Frankfurt gone, Johannesburg cancelled. She whispered to herself, all because some flight crew couldn't tell the difference between presence and threat. Her chief of staff entered with an envelope. The FAA wants you to sign the Passenger Integrity Charter, publicly. Or what? Or be removed from the International Compliance Registry. Jesus. And Miranda? What? Justice Monroe has been summoned to testify. Silence. Back on Flight 417, the sky had darkened. But inside, the energy was warm. A few passengers were talking softly, watching Aria sleep with her sketchbook pressed against her cheek. Sophie whispered to Justice, "So what happens now? Are you going to Washington?" Justice didn't look up. "They'll come to me." Elsewhere, in a nondescript office near Capitol Hill, they already had. The Senate Subcommittee on Transportation Ethics had voted 11-1 to fast-track a special hearing. The name on the docket? Monroe Justice, Emergency Hearing on Aviation Ethics Cascade Protocol. The trigger? Flight 417, Tier 3 activation. Passenger, minor, race-based removal. Evidence corroborated by internal witness. FAA confirms compliance breach. The public wouldn't know yet, but behind closed doors, the system was already shifting. Overnight, 3 more airlines, including Northern Sky and Aerolink, were added to the ethics review list. The Ethos Bridge platform began flagging past incidents involving children of color, disabled passengers, and non-English speakers. Each one was cross-referenced with crew behavior, escalation patterns, and internal handling. What began with Aria Monroe was now a reckoning. In a private email thread leaked to the press, one Arkway executive had written, "How did we not see this coming?" "Because we thought dignity was optional," someone replied. The next morning, Justice and Aria quietly exited their flight in Zurich. No paparazzi, no press, just a few passengers stopping to say thank you. One elderly man offered his business card. He said nothing, just nodded. Another young mother hugged Aria and whispered, "My son's nonverbal too. You helped more kids than you know." Outside the terminal, a car was waiting. Not black, not armored, just discreet. The driver handed Justice a folder. "From Washington, they're requesting a live statement within 48 hours. Justice opened it, saw the header, Federal Ethics Oversight Committee, Joint Hearing Request. She nodded, then said, almost to herself, "If they want to hear me, they're going to have to hear her too." Back in the US, Twitter exploded. A clip of Aria's drawing, a plane with broken wings and a shining ripple, was now a symbol. Over 12 million views. People started tagging airlines with it. "Are you flying with dignity, or just flying?" A ripple effect hashed Justice Flight was fedden. Signed the accord yet? Even celebrities joined in. A-list actors reshared the clip. Black politicians made public statements. Civil rights groups issued calls for mandatory flight crew training nationwide. Inside the Skynova war room, desperation settled in. They drafted a last-ditch statement. "We believe all passengers deserve dignity. We deeply regret the events aboard Flight 417 and are fully cooperating with the FAA and Ethos Corps." But within hours, it was mocked online, because no one mentioned Aria's name. "You didn't regret the event, you regret the exposure." One reply read, "Now liked 400K times." Lauren, she was nowhere to be found. Last seen being escorted through a side gate. Rumors swirled, she'd lawyered up. She was trying to get ahead of the ethics hearing. She might face criminal misconduct charges if internal footage showed any physical aggression. But no one really cared anymore, because the face of this shift was a 6-year-old girl with a drawing pad and a quiet mother who pressed no charges. only buttons. Back in Zurich, in a quiet hotel suite, Arya finally looked up from her drawing. "Mom?" "Yes, baby." "Why are they so scared now?" Justice smiled softly, brushing a curl behind Arya's ear. "Because you stayed kind when they expected you to cry." The wood-paneled hearing chamber was unusually quiet for a Wednesday morning on Capitol Hill. Cameras lined the back wall. A CNN chyron whispered across the screen. Live. Senate hearing on aviation ethics, triggered by viral Flight 417 incident. Inside, there were no raised voices, no pounding gavels. Just tension. Because Justice Monroe had arrived, and she hadn't come alone. At her side, holding her sketchbook with both hands, was Arya, dressed in navy blue, with her curls brushed smooth and a small pin shaped like an airplane on her collar. The room fell silent as they entered. No one needed to announce them. The chairwoman of the Ethics Subcommittee, Senator Althea Boyd, glanced down at her notes before looking up. "Ms. Monroe, thank you for being here. And Arya," she smiled gently, "thank you for your courage." Arya nodded quietly. She didn't speak, but she didn't need to. Justice settled into her seat before the microphone. Calm, steady, no flash. Behind her were 4 binders. She didn't touch them. Instead, she looked the entire room over, eye to eye, and said simply, "I didn't come here for revenge. I came to finish the conversation we've been avoiding for 20 years. A few senators shifted in their chairs. Some squirmed, but no one interrupted. Because Justice wasn't a celebrity. She wasn't loud. She wasn't asking for donations. She was just inevitable." Senator Boyd leaned forward. "For the record, Ms. Monroe, please state your professional background." "Former federal judge, co-author of the Passenger Ethics Accord, co-developer and final approver of the Ethos Bridge Cascade Protocol." Murmurs rippled through the back rows. Most people in the room had known it already, but hearing it out loud made it real. Senator Nash, a skeptical member from a red state, leaned in. "So you activated a Tier 3 ethics cascade because a flight attendant removed you and your daughter from a seat?" Justice didn't blink. "No, Senator. I activated it because that airline, and others like it, have normalized behavior that violates not only dignity, but federal compliance. My daughter was simply the latest excuse they needed to make someone like me invisible." "And what exactly was the protocol you triggered intended to do?" "To test whether our systems protect people when no one's filming." At that moment, the screens behind the committee flickered on. A map of the U.S. lit up, red dots spreading across major hubs: Atlanta, JFK, LAX, O'Hare. Each dot represented an ethics violation reported within the last 18 months, all underreported, most unpunished. Justice continued. "The cascade doesn't punish, it reveals. It forces systems to face what they've buried. It gives power back to the quiet, to the unseen, to the Arya Monroes of the world." Arya didn't speak, but her grip tightened around her sketchbook. On her lap was the same ripple drawing, now colored in shades of gold and gray. One staffer whispered to another, pointing at it, "That's the logo on the draft legislation." "Yeah, she inspired it." Senator Boyd looked up from her papers. "Ms. Monroe, are you recommending legislative action?" "No, I'm submitting it." She reached for one of the 4 binders behind her. Inside, a 117-page document. At the top, it read, "The Arya Accord, a mandated framework for federal airline ethics and passenger dignity." Gasps, audible. Senator Nash raised an eyebrow. "You named it after your daughter?" Justice nodded. Not because she was hurt, but because she stayed kind, when she had every right not to be. The room fell still. A moment passed. Then Boyd leaned forward again. "May we hear from Arya?" The girl looked at her mom. Justice gave a nod. Arya stood, walked to the mic, no higher than the desk, and softly said, "I don't want anyone else to feel like they don't belong, just because they look like me, or because someone's having a bad day, or thinks kids don't matter. Silence. One senator wiped his eye. Another, previously disengaged, sat up straight. No one clapped, no one dared, but the silence said everything. The clip of her speech hit 5 million views within 3 hours. The drawing, the ripple, became the official symbol of the proposed bill. 3 airlines, seeing the writing on the wall, preemptively signed onto the accord. Skynova, still resisting, until news leaked that one of their ethics suppression algorithms, designed to auto-delete flagged internal reports, had been exposed. A whistleblower inside the company had uploaded evidence, right after Flight 417. I saw what they did to that little girl, and I remembered my own daughter. I couldn't stay silent anymore. Justice didn't celebrate. She didn't smile on camera. She simply walked out of the chamber holding her daughter's hand, one step ahead of the noise. When a reporter shouted, "Ms. Monroe, what's next?" she paused, then turned slightly and said, "You tell me. Do you want dignity to be optional or required?" That night, in homes across America, families talked about what it meant to speak without yelling, to fight without fists, to hold power and use it without cruelty. In her hotel room, Aria stared out the window. Justice sat beside her, gently taking the drawing and folding it in half. "You did good today," she whispered. "Did I fix it?" Aria asked. Justice kissed her forehead. "You didn't fix it. You started it." It had only been 48 hours since Aria's quiet words echoed through the Senate chamber, but across the airline industry, it felt like the ground had shifted. Inside a glass tower in Chicago, the CEO of Skynova, Luther Baines, stood at the head of a boardroom filled with lawyers, PR consultants, and exhausted executives. He pointed to the headlines on the screen. 3 airlines signed the Aria Accord. Skynova remains silent. Public outrage builds over ethics report suppression. CEO's refusal to apologize goes viral. "This is optics," he barked, "not policy. We don't bend to hashtags." A voice at the far end of the room interrupted quietly. "It's not optics anymore, sir. Zurich, Seoul, and London just pulled Skynova's international slots for non-compliance." Luther turned. "They what?" "We've officially lost transatlantic code-share partnerships. AllianceNet suspended us." A silence heavier than concrete fell over the room. "Sir," the legal counsel added, "the FAA has given us 24 hours to either sign the accord or be placed under a Class A review." "That means—" "I know what the hell it means," he snapped. "We're being blackmailed by a child and her mother." Meanwhile, across town, in a humble press room with folding chairs and a single podium, Justice Monroe was speaking, not for drama, but for documentation. "We didn't ask to be a symbol. We were just passengers." Flanking her were leaders from 3 major airlines, Atlas Jet, Equafly, and Parallax Air, all of whom had signed the Aria Accord the night before. Each executive read a short statement, then stepped back. Then came the moment no one expected. "We're also calling for the resignation of Skynova CEO Luther Baines," said the Parallax Air CEO. "Until Skynova signs the accord and issues a formal apology, we are suspending all interline agreements." The pressure cooker burst. By 3:00 p.m., Skynova's market cap had dropped 2.1 billion. 2 pension funds issued a freeze. Shareholders began demanding a board vote, and then the internal video leaked. It showed the moment flight attendant Lauren Eves towered over Aria Monroe, barking threats, pointing in her face, yanking a blanket from her lap. Aria never spoke a word. She just looked up, confused, trying to hold her sketchbook. No one watching needed narration. Across the internet, the clip went viral under a new hashtag, #SheDidNothing, and people weren't angry. They were exhausted. That night, Justice sat at the edge of a hotel bed, reading through an email. It was from the FAA. As of midnight, the Passenger Dignity Framework has passed a unanimous board vote. The Aria Accord is now federal standard. She closed the laptop, looked at Aria sleeping. Just a kid, just 6 years old, who had simply wanted to draw clouds and sit beside her mom. Back at Sky Nova, the final crack came not from regulators, but from inside. The COO, Jason Roth, knocked once, then entered Luther's office. "The board just voted, Luther." "You're not serious." "Effective immediately, you're relieved. We're signing the accord." "You're cowards, every one of you." "No, we're survivors. Your history." At exactly 11:58 p.m., Sky Nova's new interim CEO signed the ARIA Accord on national television. A statement followed. "We acknowledge the harm done to Aria Monroe and her mother Justice. We acknowledge our system's failure to protect dignity. We commit to rebuilding trust, not just through policy, but through people. And finally, we offer no excuses. We only offer change." The next morning, Aria's drawing, "The Ripple Over the Broken Plane," was projected onto the side of the FAA headquarters. A permanent sculpture version would be installed 2 months later at JFK Terminal 4. By week's end, 112 airlines had signed the accord. Congress passed emergency provisions ensuring mandatory bias training for all U.S. flight crews, independent passenger complaint auditing, and most importantly, real-time FAA monitoring of in-flight ethics violations. They called it the Ripple Response Act, authored by Justice Monroe, inspired by a girl who never raised her voice. In an interview with Telltale's news network, Senator Althea Boyd summed it up best. "For years, we thought dignity was too soft to legislate. Aria showed us it's the only thing worth legislating." 1 week later, Justice and Aria stood inside the Smithsonian's new Civil Rights in Transportation exhibit. Aria stared at a photo of Rosa Parks. Right beside it, a framed version of her own Ripple sketch. "She didn't move," Aria whispered. "Neither did you," Justice said. "But I didn't even yell." Justice knelt beside her. Sometimes silence makes the biggest sound in the room. As they left the exhibit, a reporter caught up. "Justice, what would you say to flight attendants who feel unfairly judged?" She paused. "I'd say this isn't about judgment. It's about standards. If you can't treat a 6-year-old with basic dignity, you shouldn't be 30,000 feet in the air." In airports from Atlanta to Anchorage, posters started going up. "The Ripple starts with you. Dignity, non-negotiable at 30,000 feet. ARIA Accord compliant airline." And on every one, in the corner, her Ripple logo. By the end of the month, Justice Monroe declined an invitation to run for public office. She said simply, "We're not here to be politicians. We're here to be passengers. And we're not getting off this plane." It had been 2 weeks since Sky Nova's public fall. The ARIA Accord was no longer a proposal. It was federal aviation standard. Posters lined airport walls, training videos were refilmed, and every first-class passenger now received a card printed with, "You have the right to be treated with dignity, always." But for Justice Monroe, the work wasn't done, and the hardest part was just beginning. She stood at the edge of a marble atrium in D.C., watching industry leaders, former rivals, and politicians whisper across round tables. The Global Passenger Ethics Summit, first of its kind, was underway. And she wasn't just an observer. She was the closing keynote speaker. Aria, dressed in a blue blazer, sat nearby with a coloring book. She wasn't drawing ripples this time. She was sketching a plane made of people holding hands. An assistant approached. "Ms. Monroe, the FAA chair would like to speak privately before your address." Justice followed the woman down a hallway lined with glass cases, each holding mementos of past aviation milestones. Amelia Earhart's gloves, early boarding passes, faded black and white uniforms. At the end stood FAA Chair Ronald Greer, the man who, just 3 weeks ago, had dodged every ethics question thrown at him. Now, he looked humbled, tired. "Justice," he began, voice low. "I want to thank you, truly." "It's not about thanks, Ron. It's about accountability. And we're working on it. We've launched an independent audit task force, but I need to ask." She stopped him with a glance. If you're about to say you need me to co-chair it, we do, he interrupted quietly. Justice sighed. You spent years ignoring this issue, and now that the public's watching, you want a face. A black woman to make it look like the agency cares. No, he said, more firmly now. I want you, because you built a system that exposed all of ours. There was a beat. Then she replied, if I say yes, I do it my way. Total transparency, real power, no panels that talk without action. Done, he said, without hesitation. Justice nodded once. Then we start Monday. Later, during her keynote address, the room filled with press. Every major airline CEO was in attendance. Some looked remorseful, others irritated, but no one dared leave. Justice stood behind the podium and didn't raise her voice. We are not here to talk about bad apples. We are here to talk about broken barrels. Gasps, but no interruptions. She scanned the room. Because if you let one flight attendant push a child out of first class and no one reports it, no one speaks up, and the passenger gets blamed, that's not a mistake. That's a mechanism. Her words cut like glass. You don't fix that with a slogan. You dismantle the mechanism. She paused. And we're just getting started. Back in New York, Justice and Aria returned home for the first time in a month. As they walked into their Harlem brownstone, something felt different. Not just the flowers on the porch from strangers, but the package on the kitchen table. Inside, a handwritten note and a small pin. The note read, from the Norwegian Ministry of Justice. We would be honored if Aria Monroe would represent the United States at the upcoming International Forum on Youth Dignity and Travel. No speech needed, just her presence. Aria read it 3 times, then looked up at her mom. I get to go to Norway? Justice smiled softly. Looks like it. Will there be airplanes? Lots of them. But this time, they'll know your name. That night after Aria fell asleep, Justice sat alone at the dining table, scrolling through her inbox. A journalist from Tokyo wanted to interview her. A senator asked if she'd consider running for office. A book agent offered a memoir deal, but she didn't reply to any of them. Instead, she opened a draft email labeled Systemic Reform, Phase 2. The next day, Aria returned to her art class. Her teacher smiled, handing her a fresh set of watercolors. But when the other kids circled around her, asking about her trip and the hearing, Aria just said, it was kinda like show and tell, but the grown-ups were finally listening. Meanwhile, Justice sat across from 3 whistleblowers, 2 flight attendants and a pilot, all previously silenced by NDAs. They were ready to talk now. We thought we'd lose our jobs, one said. But when we saw what happened to Aria, we realized staying quiet was the job. Justice leaned forward. I'm not here to save you. I'm here to show the truth. Are you ready for that? We are. And just like that, the next phase began. In the background, the first Aria Ethics Monitoring Centers opened at 5 airports. Each center staffed with third-party observers, anonymous complaint drop-offs, and trauma counselors. No cameras, no intimidation. Just one sign outside the door. You are not powerless. At JFK, an older black woman with gray locks stood in front of the sign, holding her granddaughter's hand. Is that the little girl from the news? She asked. Yeah, the child whispered. She's the one who got pushed. The woman nodded slowly. And now she's the one pushing back. In a quiet moment, Justice and Aria sat on their rooftop. The city buzzed below, but up here, it was still. Do you feel different? Justice asked. Aria thought for a second. No, just quieter. But the quiet feels bigger now. Justice smiled. Sometimes the quiet is where everything begins. They looked up at a plane passing overhead. Think they're talking about us? Aria asked. I think they're listening to you, Justice said. Finally. Justice Monroe hadn't planned to step into politics. She didn't crave the spotlight. She didn't need applause. But when 3 members of Congress showed up unannounced at her brownstone on a rainy Thursday morning, she knew her name was no longer just on headlines. It was on agendas. We don't need a politician. said Representative Althea Boyd, the first to speak as they settled into Justice's modest living room. "We need a systems architect, and whether you like it or not, that's what you are now." Justice raised an eyebrow. "And what exactly are you asking me to architect?" "The new Passenger Protections Bureau." A pause. "We want you to build it from scratch." Justice's instinct was to say no. She had a daughter to raise, a life to rebuild. She had never worked in government, but she had designed systems before, and more importantly, she knew what broken systems looked like from the inside out. "If I say yes," she said finally, "I want full authority to bring in my own team. No recycled appointments, no political favors. I want real teeth, not another office that gets buried under budget lines." Althea didn't blink. Done. Within a week, Justice's name was announced nationally as the chief architect of the Federal Passenger Protections Bureau, FPPB. The backlash came immediately. Cable pundits said she was too emotional. Airline lobbyists called it symbolic overreach. One viral tweet read, "What's next? Letting 6-year-olds rewrite policy too?" Justice didn't respond. She just printed that tweet, folded it, and tucked it into the first page of her reform proposal. She titled the document, "The ARIA Standard." By month's end, Justice and her hand-picked team, mostly women, mostly people of color, mostly survivors of discrimination, had drafted a sweeping plan. It included a federal ethics scorecard tied to operational licenses, real-time anonymous reporting systems at all major terminals, mandatory psychological reviews for repeat offender crew members, and a national rule. Children under 12 cannot be forcibly reseated without parent or guardian approval. They presented it to Congress in a public hearing, and that's when the real fireworks started. A senator, white, male, smirking, leaned into his mic. "Ms. Monroe, are you suggesting that a single incident involving your daughter gives you the authority to dictate industry policy?" Justice didn't flinch. "I'm not here because of a single incident. I'm here because you didn't act after tens of thousands of incidents. My daughter's story is not an exception. It's a mirror. You're just uncomfortable with the reflection." The room fell into silence, except for the faint scribble of journalists' pens. Later that night, after tucking Aria into bed, Justice received a phone call. "Ms. Monroe," the voice said. "This is Secretary Mallory at the Department of Transportation. I just wanted to personally inform you, the bill passed committee. It goes to the House floor next week." Justice didn't say anything at first. Then, "Thank you, but don't thank me yet. Wait until it passes, gets signed, and actually does something." Meanwhile, Aria was having her own moment. A children's magazine ran a feature called "Meet Aria, the Girl Who Changed How You Fly." Kids at her school started wearing ripple pins. Her sketchbook got published, proceeds donated to a travel equity fund. And one day, during recess, a little boy walked up and said, "My mom said you're the reason she's not scared to fly anymore." Aria blinked, then smiled. "Tell your mom she's the reason I'm not scared to talk anymore." In airports across the country, the ripple symbol began appearing beside TSA signs and safety instructions. But one place remained untouched: Sky Nova. The airline had stayed silent, refused to join the new ethics coalition, refused to acknowledge Aria publicly, until another video leaked. This one showed a white boy in first class, yelling and throwing a tantrum. A black flight attendant tried to calm him. Instead of being removed, the child was offered snacks and an iPad. The contrast was damning. Public pressure mounted. And finally, Sky Nova folded. They issued an apology, not just to Aria, but to every child whose dignity was denied. Justice wasn't interested in revenge, but she was interested in results. So when the final vote came through, 418-3 in favor of the Monroe Passenger Rights Act, she didn't celebrate. She simply forwarded the bill to her team with a note. "Phase 2 begins tomorrow. Let's build this thing right." In a final twist, Justice received an envelope from the president. Inside, a handwritten note. "Your voice turned pain into power. Your daughter turned silence into change. We'd be honored if you both would attend the signing ceremony. Justice looked at the gold-embossed invitation, then walked upstairs into Aria's room. The girl was sketching again. This time, a bridge between two airplanes. "What's that?" Justice asked. "It's how people fly better now. They hold hands first." Justice smiled, brushing her fingers over Aria's curls. "You ready to fly again?" "Only if you sit next to me this time," Justice chuckled. "Always." The ripple started in Harlem, but by now, it was global. 2 weeks after President Clark signed the Monroe Passenger Rights Act into law, the U.S. officially became the first country to implement a mandatory national ethics charter for all commercial airlines. But the real surprise came when Canada, the UK, and Brazil each passed parallel legislation within 48 hours. At the center of this international movement, a 6-year-old girl with soft curls and a quiet voice, Aria Monroe. Justice stood by the window in her office at the new FPPB headquarters, watching the sunrise cast a soft gold across DC traffic. Her inbox was a war zone. Interviews, compliance meetings, ethics violations piling in from terminals in San Diego to South Korea. She could barely keep up, but she smiled when her assistant poked her head in. They confirmed it. Geneva wants Aria to attend the Global Aviation Ethics Forum. She won't need to speak. They just want her to light the opening beacon. Justice blinked. A 6-year-old girl lighting the beacon of an international aviation summit? They said it's symbolic, because she lit the first one. Justice nodded, then looked at the framed photo on her desk. Aria asleep on her shoulder the night the bill passed. Book the flight, she deserves it. Meanwhile, in airports across America, the ripple symbol had become more than a logo. It was printed on uniforms, embedded into safety videos, painted above terminal entrances. At LAX, a flight attendant quietly pinned a ripple badge to her chest before takeoff. A passenger noticed. "You believe in that little girl?" She smiled. "I work because of that little girl." Even children understood now. At a school in Atlanta, a group of 5th graders created a project called Passengers First, writing open letters to airlines about how they wanted to be treated if they ever traveled alone. One letter read, "Dear pilots, please don't call us just kids. We're people, just smaller." Another ended with, "I know Aria. We're all Aria now." Justice and Aria flew to Geneva in early spring. It was Aria's first time flying since the incident. As they boarded the international flight, a new attendant, this one visibly nervous, knelt to greet Aria. "Hi, sweetheart. Would you like to see the cockpit before we take off? Captain says he read about you in 5 languages." Aria paused, glanced at her mom, then nodded. Minutes later, she was in the cockpit, sitting in the co-pilot seat while the captain handed her a small pin. "This is from my daughter," he said softly. "She said to give it to the girl who changed flying." In Geneva, Aria didn't give a speech. She didn't need to. She walked up to a glowing white orb in the center of the stage, surrounded by global leaders, and touched her hand to it. The ripple symbol lit up across a massive screen behind her, followed by 4 words in dozens of languages. "Dignity is not optional." The audience stood in silence. Then, applause. Loud, sustained, rising in waves. But Aria? She just smiled and walked back to her seat. Her job was done. That night in their hotel room, Justice looked over at Aria as she drew airplanes again. This time, they all had windows shaped like ripples. "How do you feel?" Justice asked. Aria shrugged. "I don't want people to clap for me. I want them to clap for kids like the one who sat next to me that day. The one no one helped." Justice's throat tightened. "I think they will, baby, because now the rules are different." "Good," Aria said, going back to coloring. "Because next time, I'll be the one helping." It had been exactly 1 year since the flight, since the slap of humiliation, since the silence in first class, since the moment a 6-year-old girl had looked up at her mother and whispered, "Did we do something wrong?" Now, Aria Monroe was back at JFK. But this time, not to fly. She was here to speak. Well, not speak. Not out loud. But the event program read, Keynote Moment. Aria Monroe, honorary guest, Children's Ethics Summit. Justice stood by the wings of the stage, watching her daughter walk out in her powder blue dress and ripple pin. No microphone, no podium. Just a large screen behind her and a single spotlight. Aria held up her sketch pad, the same one she'd clung to on that day, and flipped through the pages. Each page showed something different. A child sitting alone at the back of a plane, a crew member looking the other way, a ripple spreading from one seat to the next, a plane filled with people holding hands between rows. When she reached the last page, she stopped. The drawing was simple. 2 empty first-class seats. One said, you. The other said, me. Then she looked up and said, just barely above a whisper, I saved this one for you. The room fell silent. Then, standing ovation. Outside the terminal, reporters swarmed. News anchors called it the most moving moment in aviation history. Airline CEOs tweeted support. A clip of Aria's sketchbook hit 12 million views in a day. But inside that room, the applause wasn't for virality. It was for the message. No one belongs in the sky more than a child who's told they don't. Later that night, Justice tucked Aria into bed. Mom? Yeah, baby. Do you think that lady, Barbara, do you think she knows what happened? Justice paused, then answered carefully, I don't know, but I hope she knows what you became because of what she did. Aria turned toward the window. I don't hate her. I know. I just hope she never does that to anyone else. Justice kissed her forehead. That's why we built the rules, remember? So it won't be up to someone's bad mood. It'll be the law. Aria nodded sleepily. Laws are like seatbelts. How so? You don't need them all the time, but when you do, they save everything. 3 months later, the FAA released its first quarterly ethics report under the Monroe Act. 3 airlines failed. 2 lost federal funding. 1 replaced its entire board. But no child had been reseated without consent since the law passed. Not one. Justice returned to work quietly. She declined most interviews, turned down a book deal, but she did write one op-ed in the New York Times titled, The Seat Next to Me. In it, she wrote, every flight has a story, but the most important stories aren't told over the intercom. They happen quietly, in how we treat each other when no one's filming, in whether a mother has to explain injustice to her child before takeoff, or if maybe, for once, she doesn't. The article went viral, but more importantly, it was read out loud in flight crew briefings across the country. At home, Aria had started working on a new sketchbook. Not planes this time. Bridges. Bridges between seats. Bridges between languages. Bridges between what happened and what could. When asked in a school project what she wanted to be when she grew up, Aria wrote, not president, not famous, just the person sitting next to someone who needs a seat. And in airports from New York to Nairobi, signs began to appear beside boarding gates. Dignity is not optional. Welcome aboard. You belong in the sky. If this story moved you like it moved us, drop A in the comments to honor every child who's ever been told they didn't belong. Have you ever witnessed injustice in a place where dignity should be standard, like a plane, a school, or even a waiting room? Tell us your story below. You never know who needs to hear it. And don't forget, every view, every comment, every share helps more people hear stories like Aria's. Before you go, tell us where you're watching from. You're part of the Telltales family now, and we fly everywhere. See you in the next story.